I can't believe Sony is making this mistake again. Is the PSN going down? And don't believe these PS5 Slim leaks. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the midweek news update here on the channel. We've got some awesome news stories to talk about today, honestly all about PlayStation hardware. But before I jump into it, just want to ask once again if you'll subscribe and set your notifications to all. I'm on my way to 200,000 subscribers and I'd love to get there by the end of the year. So the first news story I want to talk about today has to do with a feature that's absent from the PlayStation 5, but not really absent. It's just not being supported in the way that it should, and that is Bluetooth. So I'm sure you noticed in the announcement of the PlayStation Portal and the announcement of the Pulse Explorer and Pulse Elite wireless headsets that they have Bluetooth, but if you want to connect to the PlayStation Portal, that device itself doesn't have Bluetooth. It has a thing called PlayStation Link, and it's going to be a wireless connectivity standard for PlayStation devices going forward once that device is released. So if you want to use any wireless headsets with your PS Portal, you're going to have to pick up one that has PlayStation Link. Now, Sony is saying that this proprietary connection will work with the PlayStation 5, it'll work with PC, it'll work with Mac, and I'm really curious how exactly that is, because since it's proprietary and it's not exactly Bluetooth, I don't understand how it's going to work with these devices without a dongle or a chip. Now, if they include a dongle in the box, which it seems like they're going to do with these headsets, that's one way to do it, right? Like, it's technically probably going to be a Wi-Fi connection or some other sort of Bluetooth, just some way for them to have a proprietary connection that only PlayStation accessories can use so they can eliminate latency from their headsets, which at the end of the day is a good feature. I think it's awesome that we're getting wireless headsets these days that not only come with dongles that get rid of wireless latency, but also have Bluetooth that does the same thing in some cases. So I do understand the necessity for something new, and I'm sure Sony, if pressured on this, will just give a canned answer like, oh, when we were developing the PlayStation Portal, we wanted to make sure it was going to be as cheap as possible. So that's why the battery life is only going to be 4 or 5 hours. They're saying it's going to be as long as a DualSense controller, and I'm really curious what they mean by that, because if you're playing a game on your PlayStation 5 with like stock settings on your DualSense controller, for some reason, just depending on how much haptic feedback there is, or if it's using the adaptive triggers, or if it's using the speaker and the controller, you know, all these different features of the controller, that can make the battery life of the DualSense vary greatly, from like 3 or 4 hours all the way up to like 9 or 10 hours, just completely depending on what game you're playing. So yeah, taking that into account, and also the fact that it's not going to have Bluetooth, that's a pretty frustrating situation, because the PlayStation 5 also doesn't have Bluetooth either. So for Sony to once again come up with their own proprietary version of a wireless technology instead of just using what already exists, it really sucks to see, because that's bringing us back to the PSP days and the Vita days. Because if you guys weren't around, or you just didn't really pay attention back when the Vita came out, there's a lot of reasons that that thing didn't really take off. I mean, one of them is price, one of them is the fact that Sony had a great launch lineup of games, but then after that there was like a big year of just drought on that console, and also a lot of the games that came to it, like Unit 13 for example, really weren't all that great. They were good, they were just not good enough to get people to kind of go out and buy a Vita when they could spend, I think, like 150 at the time on a 3DS, and at that point in time there was a massive library of 3DS games to take advantage of. There was a drought on that console too, but it came out earlier than the PS Vita, so it had a little bit more time to start building up its games. On the PSP, they used Memory Stick Duo, and at least at that point in time, a lot of other Sony devices like cameras and I think mini disc players were using these memory sticks as well. So it was a proprietary memory stick that you could use on multiple different Sony devices, whereas the PS Vita just basically had Sony's own version of a micro SD card. If you put them side by side, I'm pretty sure that the Vita's memory card was a little bit smaller, but at the end of the day, it was just a micro SD card. And it literally got to the point where someone made an adapter where you could take a micro SD card and put it into this adapter and then slot that into your Vita, but you would have to hack your Vita to actually use that, because Sony locked down the thing so hard that you couldn't even find a better way or cheaper way to get more memory. I'm pretty sure they only went up to 128 gigabytes though, and if you wanted a card like that size, you were going to pay well north of $100 for it. And as someone who only bought the PlayStation Vita in college because handheld gaming was a lot more feasible to me, not only were the consoles cheaper, like getting a Vita was a lot cheaper than getting a PlayStation 4, the games were cheaper as well at only 40 bucks, and there were a lot of ports coming over and indie games that were a lot cheaper. Having to go out and buy a huge huge ass memory card that was super expensive. That was not really in the cards for me. Whereas now with the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, they both have micro SD card slots, and you can get a 1 terabyte micro SD card for around 30 or 40 bucks. So when you're comparing 1 terabyte at 30 or 40 bucks to getting 128 gigabytes at around $99, that was a huge reason why the PS Vita failed. So to see Sony making the exact same mistakes again when they genuinely don't have to with the PlayStation Portal and the upcoming PS5 Slim, it really sucks, because from what I can tell, both the Pulse Elite and the Pulse Explorer headsets have Bluetooth built in, which is a genuinely great feature, right? Like when you're using PS Link or you're using a dongle and connecting to your computer that way, or the PS Portal or the PS5, you can also connect to your phone and listen to a podcast, a tutorial YouTube video, pretty much anything you want to listen to. You can hear it through the headset at the exact same time as you're playing a game. And to me, like, that feature is cool. I use it a lot on the PC. It's just locking it down to a proprietary thing called PlayStation Link. That's bringing back the old PS3, PSP, PS Vita era Sony that no one really wants to see. So what Sony's essentially doing here with the PlayStation Portal is basically forcing people to buy one of these two new headsets, right? Because if you have a Bluetooth headset, you have a Pulse headset already, you have, I don't know, like the Razer Hammerhead Hyperspeeds, I don't think any of those will work with this device. And if you want to use a headset with it that isn't wired, you're going to have to pick up one of these new headsets. So yeah, I just really don't understand what's going on with this thing. It just doesn't really seem like the right time for this to release. The way that they're locking it down with the headphones needing to have PS Link unless they're wired. Also the fact that it has no onboard operating system that'll allow you to emulate games. I understand that PS Link also allows streaming to work better. I am definitely the type of guy who has to see it to believe it, because once again, I have great internet here at my house. It's a gigabit setup. It's the best you can get. I have a whole mesh set up around my house. And no matter where you are within my house, you're at minimum getting 500 megabits up and down. And the closer you get to my studio in the basement, you're really going to end up pushing 1 gigabit per second up and down, which is awesome. But there's no excuse for the streaming over the exact same network from my PlayStation 5 console to be as bad as it is. I'm not even streaming games from the cloud. I'm streaming them directly running on my actual PS5 within my own house. And not only is there terrible stuttering, the image is letterboxed because of the aspect ratio of my phone. So to know that barely works correctly when you're streaming from your PS5, and then finally the last nail in the coffin, I guess, here is that it's 360p if you want to cut down on the stuttering. And I'm saying cut down on the stuttering because it still stutters playing a game that's super easy to run like Diablo 4, but 360p was like acceptable for me in terms of stuttering. But then the image is so grainy on my phone, I can't really see anything. I just genuinely don't think at this point it's really going to work for most people, and I need to be proven wrong by Sony just taking it to someone's house, I guess, to show me it working on a home network, because them showing it off at their headquarters in the perfect internet environment, you know, where everything is set up exactly as it needs to be to get the best connection, that's not good enough for me, because, you know, you're not actually running the game on the handheld. So yeah, it's like chip damage, right? The more accessories that are released for the PlayStation 5 and the more concessions that are made for just bottom line reasons, or they want people to buy their headset specifically, so they're actually forcing people to do it unless they have wired headphones, the more irritating it's going to get as time goes on. But I wish Sony would just wake up and realize that what people really want is a handheld version of the PlayStation 5 that'll let them buy games and play on both this handheld and on the TV. That technology exists. It's called the Steam Deck. If you have a gaming PC, you can buy games on Steam, and if you have a Steam Deck, you can take those same Steam games, even though they're digital, on the go without Wi-Fi, and they don't even need to check their licenses. So if they can figure it out over at Valve, a company that has no bosses and just lets people kind of work on whatever project they want, and the stuff they ship is the stuff that gets over the finish line, I think Sony, one of the biggest consumer electronic companies in the world, can figure it out as well. But there really could be one saving grace for the PlayStation Portal, and that's because the PlayStation Network was down today when I'm filming this video. And the reason that could actually be a good thing in terms of the PlayStation Portal is that over the past few years, every time the PlayStation Network goes down, it really turned out to be because Sony was fixing something behind the scenes. The first time this happened, I think, was last year, and it was around the same time when they were trying to release the whole feature where you could finally change your PlayStation Network name. Every time they kind of made back-end updates behind the scenes leading up to that announcement, the PlayStation Network would go down for a little bit. And then when they introduced the whole new PlayStation Plus roster where you get Essential, Extra, and Premium, the PlayStation Network was going down all the time there as well. So the only thing I can really think of here as to what they could be working on is some new network technology to make the PlayStation Portal stream games with less latency than you'd see on something like the Backbone controller and your iPhone. Now, back in the day when this would happen on stuff like the PlayStation 3, this really wasn't the biggest deal in the world, because while online games definitely did exist and were coming out more and more frequently, the vast majority of games that were coming out at that point were not online only. So they didn't have the same problems as Destiny 2 or Diablo 4, where when the PlayStation Network goes down, you cannot play those games because you can't connect to the PlayStation services that all of the multiplayer and the systems run on. That's obviously a little less frustrating to me with Destiny 2 than it is with Diablo 4, because when you play Destiny, that whole game kind of does exist online. It is an extremely multiplayer game. I know you can play it single player, and I do that frequently, but I really end up always using an LFG app like the actual Destiny 2 app, or I go into a strike or something like that, and I always need to play those with a second and third person. But in Diablo 4, it's so much less forgivable. Even in the overworld, when you're looking for dungeons and things like that, there's no dungeon matchmaking from what I can tell, which is crazy, because the mobile game that everyone hates, Diablo Immortal, is constantly putting matchmaking in your face for literally everything, going all the way from dungeons down to bounties. So to know that the mobile game that's built on Diablo 3 can do that, it's really frustrating that you can't even matchmake for dungeons in Diablo 4. So yeah, it's kind of like pick your favorite person to blame for this scenario. You can blame Sony for their bad infrastructure that goes down all the time. Like, get ready for Christmas this year when the PS5 Slim is out and everyone's getting Spider-Man 2 and the new Call of Duty. Yeah, I wouldn't expect the PlayStation Network to be available for like half of Christmas Day, and they never do anything to fix it. Or you can aim at developers and be mad at them, like Blizzard, who make games that look like they could be played single player, and then for no reason other than they don't want people to pirate it on PC, they block console players from playing offline. All right, so this next news story I wanted to talk about today is one I've been seeing going around the internet that just genuinely gets me irritated, because I understand the philosophy behind it, but I don't think that it's really doing anything good for console gaming. So we talked about this a little bit with the PS5 Pro last week when those leaks came out that said, oh, it's going to support 8K gaming. It's actually going to target that a little bit. It's going to be as powerful as something like a 4080 or 4090. And I kind of had to be a buzzkill there, because it's just not really a possible scenario to have a console be as powerful as that GPU, because that GPU is well north of $1,000, just the GPU alone. And if you use that in your PC, if you wanted to build one that can actually not get bottlenecked using that GPU, you're going to have to spend around $2,000 or $3,000. So to put out these articles saying that the PS5 Pro, which is probably going to be around $500 or $600, is going to have no trouble matching the power of a 4090, that's just like disingenuous and wrong. And now I'm seeing the same thing happening with the PS5 Slim, with a new article that asks, is it going to be as powerful as a 4070? And this thing goes through a lot of justifications, but in this scenario, I don't think like raw power wise it's going to be able to match a 4070, but there is a new feature potentially coming to the PlayStation 5 that could make it actually be able to do a lot of the things that a 4070 can do, which is awesome. The reason that they're picking the 4070 is that because if you Google it, the PS5 currently is around the same performance as a 2070, which is a really good card and is still super capable. It's not going to get you true 4K gaming or anything like that, but neither is the PlayStation 5. There are very few games at this point in time that'll support actual true 4K, and even on the 2070, if you want to play at a 4K resolution, you're going to have to use an upscaler like DLSS. But the new feature that's coming to AMD cards, aka could come to the PlayStation 5, is called FSR3, and that's kind of why I think this article is saying, will the PS5 Slim be as powerful as a 4070? Because to use Nvidia's version of FSR3, you actually need to have a 40 series card. And that really comes down to the fact that when you take FSR and you take DLSS, they're kind of doing the same thing, but one uses the actual GPU's hardware to do it, and the other is a software version of it. So that's why FSR can be used on any GPU, whereas DLSS only works on Nvidia cards. And now it's even gotten more granular, like I just mentioned, where DLSS 3 only works on 40 series cards. And the reason DLSS 3 and by proxy FSR 3 are so important is because they have a feature called frame generation. So even when you're playing on like a super low end GPU that's in the 40 series range, you could be playing something like Cyberpunk with ray tracing at 1080p and still be able to hold around 30 or 40 FPS, because frame generation will actually insert AI generated frames when you're starting to drop below the threshold that VSync wants. So you won't have a messed up frame time in seeing all the frames, and it won't look like the game is stuttering. But AMD hasn't had a competitor to that until they announced FSR3, which does come along with frame generation. Now, unfortunately for us PS5 players, the first game that's going to support it is Starfield. As we all know, Starfield is not coming to the PlayStation 5, but it is good to know that FSR3 is going to be supported in games coming out this year, because the PlayStation 5 5, if rumors are to be believed, will be able to support FSR 3. I have my money on it coming to the PlayStation 5 because AMD is really good about just including it on any device that supports FSR, so any computer out there. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.